Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Let's welcome to the next Wasteless World Talks. And the term today, or the word today, is consequence. And I would like to start this time with you, Kevin, because I have you on the top of a screen. If you close your eyes and you hear the term consequence, what came first to your mind?
I'd see consequence as a skill which is best learned very quickly. I think that the ability to be able to read consequence and figure out for yourself extremely rapidly what the consequence of actions will be is essential to life.
That's a very interesting answer. And Bill, what about you?
I'm reminded of a posting that I saw recently that said, it's not that the demons are chasing him, it's that the consequences are chasing him, which means it was his choices that got him into this situation.
I cannot compare today with the noon session because I had none because of the event, so I wasn't able to have it. So it's pure, but you remember that a few weeks ago we spoke about coincidence, and this is what leads me to consequence generally, because I think it's really both of you describe it so well, and still there is not so many paying attention. When there is something wrong, they said all the time, it's someone else's fault. And they never thought first about it may be the consequence of my own behavior or of my own action. Do you think that the politicians and governments don't care because they don't need to fear the consequences? Because at least in my country, the first what everyone who step into the politics, into the Senate and who become a minister. So it's signed they are, how it's called the word. They cannot go to court, so they are free of, there is one word which I do not have in my mind right now, but something, sorry, you cannot blame us. We are there. So this prevention of being punished. And I will come to the word, just I forget.
When you mentioned the politicians, Michael, that's particularly timely right now, because a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump finished his trial and was found guilty. And we have heard nothing from him except how it was rigged. It's a witch hunt. It's the judge is stupid, and so on. Then yesterday, or the day before yesterday, we finished a second trial, and this is the son of the president, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, finished his trial, also guilty on all counts. And it's quiet out there. I don't hear anybody saying that it was rigged or that the judge is stupid. And this may be exactly the topic today. Somebody understands consequences and somebody does not.
I think one interesting thing is that the more power somebody has, the more immunity they have. It seems it goes with the position. In some respects, it's understandable. For example, the police in the US have this qualified immunity, which is understandable because they have an extremely difficult job and they need to have some protection just to be able, in order to do the job. But how often do polluters go to prison? How often do people who make huge profits, unfair profits out of pharma, how often are they prosecuted? It's extremely rare, and it is not just politicians and industrialists, but it's the family that goes along with them as well. I don't I haven't heard any mention of anyone from the Sackler family going to prison, for example. They simply can donate to another art gallery and seem to go away scot-free. So immunity goes with power and goes with money.
And this is exactly the word which I was
Interesting example.
searching for, immunity. So our politicians, before they step into, they signed the Immunity Act. So it's unbelievable.
So in fact, there are two sets of rules, one for those with power, the giants, and one for the working person, like the three of us. But I have to ask, it's always been this way. So this is not a surprise to anybody, is it?
No, I think one interesting thing was that social media gave everybody the opportunity to behave as if there were no consequences. So people hiding behind immunity, behind avatar names, could say whatever they wanted to anybody else, and it seemed for a long, long time to be able to get away with it. And there, the consequences should have fallen upon the social media providers, but it seems that they too don't have to abide by any single rules of decency, and there's no consequences for them either.
I am sure you noticed the latest Apple keynote speech where someone said that AI is the abbreviation for Apple intelligence. And it's unbelievable. And one question to both of you. Do you know where AI became the scientific discipline? In which year or around which year?
No.
No.
1956.
Really?
It's connected to Alan Turing. Turing, I think Turing. It's connected to him. I learned today in the morning because I edited a little bit my keynote speech, which I delivered just now. And it's quite interesting. And you probably noticed the reaction of Elon Musk, how angry he was that he will forbid all Apple phones and so on and so on. And you know the second sentence which he says, and he posted on his Twitter account. Till 2029, I will send 1 million people to Mars. I'm sorry, this guy is completely mad already. He is so immune to anything because he is rich and powerful in some way. So he combined these two into something which is completely unhuman behavior. So I do believe that if he packed his racket with 100 or 1 million ashes, the ashes of 1 million bodies, that he can deliver it there. But that will be the only result. And I doped on that as well. So
was it one of you guys who sent me this new definition of AI? Where instead of us calling it artificial intelligence, we should call it plagiarism software.
Someone call it average intelligence, which is nice as well. So, but it is a consequence, you know. Even the AI and the implementation is the consequence of that the giants offered to users and humans. They offer the easier way of life. You don't need to think. You have AI to think for you. You have your mobile phone, you have your glasses, you have a lot of things. So you don't need to really have a headache of thinking. So I think that it's a consequence. I delivered the speech, and they came an older man to me, and it was so strange. He said that he's religious, that he thinks that this is the change of behavior of human is partly the lack of understanding of something bigger like the God. And it was very strange how he commented generally on Industry 5.0, very positive, very positive. And, I'm not religious, but when he said, God bless you, I have tears in my eyes because he mean it. He mean that I do good. It was interesting feeling. Interesting. And
So
of course,
consequences
of the action. Sorry, Bill.
the consequences or lack of consequences for the giants, it's not just for the giants. So there are the common working people who are able to live below the radar. And if they, for example, I'm thinking of somebody right now who is currently going through a difficult time. They have, they're grown. This person is grown, still lives with the mother. Doesn't work. Very nice guy. Uh, Very giving and so on, but refuses to register for anything or to work at a job. He'll work, if I need something done with my house, he will be happy. He'll be the first one to volunteer to do it very nicely. But he feels no consequences uh, like I do. So maybe there are different stages or different levels of people who can avoid consequences. One, be rich and powerful. Two, live below the radar. Don't register for anything. Um, have family around you who will always hold you up, pick you up when you fall down. So you never have to live with consequences. Um, there are people at work who avoid consequences because they are insulated in their silo. Um, so I think it's a range of consequences that people are able to avoid or and and don't human beings try to avoid consequences, right? I'm speeding in my car and I know I'm speeding and breaking the law, and then I spot a police car up ahead and I slow down. Always try to avoid, well, negative consequences, maybe not, but that's something that is human. It's a human reaction to try to avoid consequences.
It's interesting because if you really want to avoid consequences, you have to think really big. So if you go and rob a bank and you get caught, the consequences are going to be fairly severe. But if you're the banks, you bankrupt the whole world's economy, you get bailed out by ordinary people, like in 2008.
Right.
So again, this is why giants always avoid the consequences, because of the scale that they do things at. But the interesting thing is, all of us think of consequences as punishment, like Bill is just saying. But there must be instances where the consequences are rewards. You would hope for leading a decent life, the consequences must be what, I don't know, but maybe spiritual enlightenment.
That's that absolutely. I think there's as many, maybe more good consequences. I um, have a I have a good roof over my head. I have enough to eat. I have the luck to have a wonderful, wonderful wife who was born in Minsk, by the way, and I was born in Pittsburgh. So how the heck did that one happen? So it's consequences of our choices, and there are good consequences as well as bad consequences. I agree with you. It's not just punishment.
question
And I
is,
think
sorry,
I was,
you, Kevin,
I was saying this consequence of when you die, that there's a final reckoning, that you're going to have to go and meet your maker. And, you know, that is somehow consequential, you have to say.
And is a threat, and is a threat that has been held over our heads ever since we were born.
Yep. Yep.
It is a question if you remind yourself on a school. I think we have been mostly taught about the negative consequences of our behavior. You will learn wrong, you will not have job, you will whatever, you will be punished, you will, and so on. And I am just now thinking that probably only in sport, there was a very opposite way. So if you will do a lot, if you will train a lot, you will become best and you will become a sportsman and you will get a medal. But I have a problem with these very young memories because of the loss of my memory of the 15 years. So how was it in the school? Was there both, or was one more in the negative way or in the positive? I do not remember myself. How was it with you? Do you remember?
When I was growing up, I studied hard because I wanted the good grades. I wanted the good grades so that I could go to a good university. I wanted to go to a good university so that I could get a good job. I wanted to get a good job. So my whole life has been doing today so that I can benefit tomorrow.
Which is the big picture, which you mentioned before.
Which is the big picture. But now, Michael, I am mostly retired. I write, I walk on the beach. So what am I doing now that will have consequences in uh, 10 years or 20 years down the road, the big picture? So all of this purpose, which I've lived my entire life with the purpose of the next few steps. And so now what is my purpose now? Which is something that I've been wrestling with for the last 5 or 6 years or something, and I'm still wrestling with it. Um, what can I do now? I guess I stay active so that so I don't just decay and fade away. Um, my purpose now is to be good to my grandchildren. Um, that's what I always say is my purpose, because their life is very different. They learn, they're going to very different schools than what I went to 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And so maybe I can help them to understand, not about computers because they're way ahead of me on the technical stuff, but why people do things and what choices are and what consequences are. So, so through your life, I think your purpose changes and the consequences that you are either trying to avoid or trying to gain change.
Actually, Bill, that's really interesting, because in nature, if you're a wildebeest, then you're 1,000 kilos of protein, and there is only one consequence, and that is your purpose, which is to pass on your protein to predators. So purpose and consequence can be tightly bound together.
And I think that generally when we reach the age, so first of all, the fact that we reach the age is the consequence of our life which we lived before. If we don't live a healthy life in a way, a life which can make us safe on a financial or other level, so we will not be able to write books or spend time with the children and so on. So we will not have a roof over our head. But when we reach this age, I think that the main consequence, at least I feel it on my side and probably with you as well, is to leave the heritage behind. You know, before we did for us knowing that if we are lazy, we will not have this ability. But in the mind was okay, and then will be the heritage which I can hand over, and that's a knowledge which many cannot so simply generate from the AI or anyone else from internet. It's a personal experience. And handing over the personal experience, I think this is one of the consequences of the life which we have lived.
And actually, it's really interesting because if we misbehave, we know we're going to face the consequences. But if we behave well, then we expect a reward. You know, if you work hard your whole life, you expect to have a decent house and a decent retirement. Yeah. And it is a consequence of hard work, but it's more than that. It's an incentive, whereas the consequence is normally a threat.
That's an interesting topic. When I compare it to the coincidence which we talked before, which we agree that there is no coincidence generally, and there is consequences. It's so interesting. It is so interesting that in my language, it's a common way to say it's coincidence. But I almost never heard anyone who said it's the topic of today's discussion, consequence. So interesting that it even somehow disappears from the language, at least from the Czech language.
That's curious that you would say that, Michael, and I agree with it. We very rarely say, well, those are the consequences. We say all the time, we say, well, that's a coincidence. But I'm going to start saying consequence. The problem with saying, well, that's the consequence, is that it's judgmental. And it sounds judgmental, and many people try not to sound judgmental. Um, and I'm one of the, I don't like to say it. So if I were to say, oh, you're fat, well, that's the consequence from eating too much and not exercising enough. Judgmental, very judgmental. But still, it's true.
Yeah. When I was 16, I was working, I was still at school, but I was working on Saturdays in a shop selling car parts. And being the Saturday worker, I got all the lousy jobs. And so the manager, he said, I want you to empty all of these glass shelves, take them down, stack them up, wash them, and put them back. So I said, well, okay. So I emptied everything, put all these glass shelves against the wall. And one of the customers kicked them with his foot by accident and smashed a lot of them. So the manager comes out absolutely furious, and that doesn't blame me, but goes straight up to the shop, to the shopper, and says, you and your bloody big feet, I knew that was going to happen. And then this guy just looked at him and said, well, why did you do it?
If you knew it was going to happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, the consequences, if they were that obvious, it's his own downfall. It's nobody else's.
But this sentence, as you said, I know what will happen, it's quite common in here as well. I know that it will happen, especially if you would like to blame someone or someone did something. This sentence is quite frequent. You just remind me of it.
In fact, if you knew something bad was going to happen and you didn't stop it, then it is your fault.
You know, it will be very interesting. There exist tools in industry which are called advanced planning tools. They use with a huge amount of data, they analyze it, and they can really predict how much sales up to the 2% will be tomorrow in a small shops, whatever. So they are really, I saw it in action. I don't understand how it works, but I saw that it worked. So, and you know, it will be very interesting if we can prevent this to happen by understanding this or by paying attention to the feeling, I know it will happen. But we do not pay attention to that. We just let someone do, and it happens. And the question is whether we really know or whether it is just the excuse for something.
Because this is really interesting, because then it applies or implies that we actually have some control over consequence. Consequence is in our dominion. I remember there was a guy working in Portsmouth in a machine shop, and his job was this huge, it was just some kind of rough grinding machine, and it would move on this big bed backwards and forwards, taking off pieces of metal. And he was with this machine 8 hours a day. And as this big bed moved forward, there was a hole in this thing. So he was so bored, as the thing went forward, he put his finger into the hole and then take it out. And of course, you know what the consequence is. He lost his finger. But the interesting thing is, he didn't lose his job until he lost the second finger.
But I think you said something very, very important, because we are responsible for the consequences. On a big percentage, we are. Simply it is, because we are responsible for the future of ours. Of course, there are some ways or something which we cannot influence ourselves, but because we can influence our behavior, so we are really responsible for the consequences. The only issue is that we blame all the time others if something happens. We never say it was my fault, or very few, I cannot say never, but very few times we say first it was my fault. Frequently we say it was your fault, and maybe I was part of it. So, because it's easier. It's easier.
And I think a nice thing about human nature is that, you know, we care for each other. And so in our behavior, we make sure that our behavior doesn't hurt anybody else, because we're aware of the consequences of our actions. So when you hear of a drunk driver, of course we get all really, really angry, because we all know the consequences for other people, for the innocent, rather than the perpetrator.
The perpetrator also knows the consequences, but does it anyway.
There is so much in the human behavior, not only the words, how we choose the words, how we use the words, but even how we act, which is so fascinating. We really can change from one moment to the other. You know, I just delivered a keynote. It was one of the standard wake-up calls, and the people who did not sit there because it was the sound was all around this spice area, they stop in walking and start listening. They haven't seen the pictures. They just listen to my voice as I direct it, and it was quite interesting to look at these people. It was like switching from real-time movie into slow movie, slow movie. It was quite interesting how the people stopped and looked around, and there was the sound which they start to listen, and they did not move till quite a long time until I ended. It was quite interesting to look at this, and that's exactly the consequence of the work which was done before, of the speeches, which thousands of speeches which I delivered, that I say all the time, it doesn't matter whether who is listening, because if you listen, it will simply change your mindset. And it was so interesting, so interesting. So nice topic.
I think there's another kind of consequences, which maybe it can be very negative, but can also be really positive. And that is unforeseen consequences. Because then anything can happen. So if you do something, then it forms almost a chain of events. And the outcome is unforeseen, but it could be quite fortuitous at the same time.
I think our wasteless world talks are exactly that. We don't know where it leads us, but we know it is important and we know it will be important. So I think that's what you just described. Have you ever thought what will be the consequence after you publish your book and the readers will read it? Because all of us, we said we are not writing for the readers, we are writing for us. But still, I think this thought may come to your mind.
It's like the theory of the butterfly flapping his wings.
Yeah.
You 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 don't know what the third step or the 100th step as it combines with other events or actions, and you don't know if someone reading one page out of the book plants a seed and they later make a decision partially based on the seed that they've been thinking about. And it could be a very, very big action that they take. And I, as an author, have no concept or hope or that something that big will come of something that I did, or partially because of something I did. So all we can really do, and I think the same thing about my grandchildren. Um, One may become president in 30 years, and one may be an astronaut, or simply be a good person and a good father and teach their children who will grow up to be president. So when we teach our children to be polite or to work hard or to try, whatever we are teaching them, how much will they learn? How much will they change their behavior? Uh, Probably very little, but just a little bit that 10 years from now or 50 years from now will make a huge difference. And so all we can each do, I think, is the best each day that we can, looking out for ourselves, but also looking out for other people. Um, and you talked about religion a few minutes ago. If you take these good intentions and you clothe them, mask them in religious words, and you make some male to be the deliverer person of these good words and this tradition and so on. And so, in a way, being a good grandparent is like being a good priest, you except without a lot of the trappings, a lot of the. I probably took that analogy too far, didn't I?
There was
Interesting.
if I do remember, there was a movie with someone who predict consequences, and it was a famous movie with this scientific or whatever. What is the church?
Scientology.
Scientologists, and the leading actor, English or American, and there was a movie how they predict the crime. And then he find out that it's not predicting, and it's I don't know the name. So yes, Kevin.
That was Tom, isn't it?
Yes. And why I came to that, because we have software which is quite powerful. So can we cannot we use the software to predict consequences up to the personal level? We probably can, because it's something like a system, and
you can predict probabilities.
probabilities.
So
Yeah.
if I rob a bank, if I rob a bank, there is a certain probability that I will be caught, and there is a certain probability that that the court will find me guilty, and so on. So you can predict probabilities based on past history. I'm just reluctant to use past history to predict the future, which which is what we do all the time. But the future is changing so rapidly now, with things like AI, and with things like the massive power that giants have, which I don't know that they had that 50 years ago. Certainly not to this level. Certainly not that the giants can step on a rocket ship and go into outer space and brag that they went up into outer space. But it's just changing so fast. So some people say to me, "You cannot predict the future," but we're talking right now about consequences. Maybe you cannot predict the future with precision, but you can certainly predict with probability. If A, then B. If you do this, this is the probability that it will turn out either good or bad. So you can. I strongly believe that you can predict the future, not with precision.
And Bill, I think the interesting thing is not to predict the future, because I mean, none of us will be around to see what we predicted, but to paint possibilities for both good and bad. And that's the interesting thing, because then we can see where we could be going. And then we can change path.
You know, I don't think we can predict the future, but I am true believer we can change the future. We are doing the future. We are creating the future. I see it in my writing, you know, it's again 5 times in every day last week. It was so accurate, 3 months predictions, not predictions, 3 months, what I wrote 3 months before, it resulted the same day as it was published. That was, even the people who read it, they say, yes, right now we do understand that you are traveling in time. That was so interesting. And we have 1.5 minutes left again. So it's the consequence of stepping deeper into conversation and not paying attention to the time. But it's great. So it was, I think it was, again, so important discussion that I'm sure it should be repeated, but I'm sure it will not be probably us who will step into it, because there are another 19 million words which needs to be discussed, something like that. So I would like to wish everyone have a nice time, free of waste and wasting in all its form. Stay safe, be free, be human, and please pay attention to the consequences of your action. It's worth to do that. Thanks a lot and have a nice time. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.